In case you are wondering if today's video is about Star Wars, I'm sorry to disappoint, it's not. I'm just using these two action figures to introduce a case study where we have two stormtroopers that we're going to call Learner A and Learner B. These two learners are complete beginners and they have decided to start learning English at the same time. They both have equal abilities, started learning in the same school and with the same teacher. After 6 months of studying, their learning curves were as following. If we look closely, A's learning curve keeps rising steadily from day one, but B's learning curve is different. It has risen at the beginning, stagnated at some point, then it dropped. I know what you are thinking. Given the fact that both learners have the same abilities and the same teacher, why is there a difference in their learning curves? Are there any factors that affect learning? If yes, what are these factors? Curious to find out? Stick around for another episode of Mehdi's Tips.
Are you crazy?
Hello guys, my name is Mehdi and welcome to another episode of Mehdi's Tips, a channel where I share with you tips on how to learn and teach English. If you want to see my previous videos, you can watch them on my YouTube channel or on my Facebook page, which you will find mentioned in the description. Without further ado, let's jump back to our today's question. Why did A do better than B? Even though they had the same abilities, studied in the same school and with the same teacher. There are obviously multiple reasons that could explain the difference in learning between A and B, but one thing that I didn't mention in the intro is that during the 6 months period, A was much more motivated to learn the language than B. And this is exactly what we are going to focus on today, motivation. Is it important to be motivated to learn English, and how can motivation affect learning? Before I answer the question, I'd like to talk about a simple example that will lead up to the answer. In his book, How to Teach English, 2nd edition, Jeremy Hammer talks about children's acquisition of language, and he describes it as a way in which people get the language with no real conscious effort, without thinking about grammar, vocab, worrying about which bits of language go where. He then goes further and talks about the necessary conditions for the acquisition to take place. He starts off by talking about exposure to the language as being the first condition for language acquisition. If you remember, last time I have extensively talked about exposure. If you missed the previous episode and want to find out more about the importance of exposure, you will find the video link in the description. The second condition he mentions is the language used with children. Obviously, since we are talking about children, parents have to use simplified language to talk to their children. And the third condition he says, and I quote, "Children have a strong motivational urge to communicate in order to be understood," which means they want to communicate to their parents that they are hungry, they are thirsty, or maybe upset about something. Then, Jeremy Hammer asserts the importance of motivation by saying, in the end, it is their desire to communicate needs, wants and feelings that seems to matter most. An analogy to the child's acquisition of language is the example of an adult who moves to an English-speaking country. These learners usually pick up the language incredibly fast. But why? You might say, because he's living in a country where the language is used. Well, that's true, but more accurately, similar to a child, the exposure to the language is enormous and there is a strong need to communicate and be understood. Hence, a strong motivation to learn. Now that we have seen the importance of motivation in language learning, what are the implications on learning? Well, as a starting point, it is crucial to know your motivation when you start learning English. What is your motivation? If you are a student, you might learn English because you want to take the IELTS and study abroad. If you are an employee, you might need English because you work for a company that uses English or you work with international clients. Therefore, you need to write emails or deliver presentations in English. Or you are learning English simply because it will get you promoted at work. Well, and also if you are a researcher, doctor or professor, you might need English to read documents and the latest research that are available only in English. Whatever your motivation, one thing to bear in mind is that the stronger your motivation is, the more effect it will have on learning. It will push you to apply yourself by putting more effort on what you are doing and paying more attention to what you are learning. It goes without saying that motivation must be sustained throughout the whole learning process. How do you sustain it, you might ask? Well, this is something that I will talk about in more details in another video. But for now, let's go and do a quick recap of what we have talked about so far. Number 1. I started out the video by bringing up the study case of two learners who started studying English at the same time, but who had different learning curves. Number 2. Then I added the fact that learner A was more motivated than learner B, and from there we derived the following two questions. Is it important to be motivated to learn English? And how can motivation affect learning? To answer the question, I have quoted from Jamie Hamer's book to explain children's acquisition of language, and from there demonstrated the importance of motivation in the process of acquiring a language. Next, I gave an analogy to children's language acquisition with adults by giving the example of a person moving to an English-speaking country. After that, I gave examples of different motivations learners from different backgrounds can have. And lastly, I demonstrated the implications that motivation can have on learning. Well, there you have it, folks. Another valuable tip to learn English. I hope it was informative. I'm sure that most of you have a motivation to learn English. So, what is your motivation? What is driving you forward? Let us know in the comment section below. If you like the video, don't forget to press like and subscribe. You can also follow me on social media. You will find all these information in the description. Thanks again for watching. I'm your host Mehdi, and this was another episode of Mehdi's Tips, a channel where we make English learning and teaching easier one video at a time.